Life for a young chick can be challenging, especially when your mum's paddling upstream. But if you're smart, you can spot an opportunity. Hop on, hitch a ride, get comfy, 'cause it's time for tonight's Spring Watch. Hello!
Hello and welcome to Windy Drizzle Watch 2024. What a difference a day makes. Describe the weather in one word.
I think it's a little bit grim.
Ghastly. It's absolutely ghastly, but we're not going to allow it to dampen our spirits because we're live from the RSPB's Arne Reserve down here in Dorset. It's a fantastic place. All sorts of habitats. This was a shot we clearly got earlier in the week. It's not looking like that now, but we've got plenty coming up in tonight's show, including the answer to a project that has vexed humanity for 2,000 years. Something that you may have witnessed in the last few days if you had turned a light on. More of that later.
2,000 years, that's a long time
years.
to ponder something.
First time it was written down was 1 AD.
All will be revealed. But we want to know what you've seen in your garden. You've certainly embraced that Spring Watch family vibe. You've been sending in some absolutely brilliant stuff. Let's start with something that you can listen to. So listen to this. This has been sent in by David Dinsley. It is the sound of a corncrake, and that's a male corncrake's mating call. It's calling for a mate. Would it attract you?
It certainly would.
Would it?
Corncrakes get me going. I tell you, I love the corncrake. Fantastic bird. But whilst we're on amorous avians, what about these ringed plovers? Now, during the breeding season, they have a monogamous relationship, and the male, as you can see, works very, very hard to impress the female.
That's like the Ministry of Silly Walks. That's hilarious.
It's pretty silly, but it will do the trick in the end, as you'll see, because she will stand still enough for him to jump onto her back and delicately try and place himself. But unfortunately, on this occasion, she shuffles away before he has his way. So he'll have to go through that process all over again.
Plover frolics going on there. We got some more frolics going on with pine martins in someone's garden. This is absolutely delightful. Sent in by Les and Chris Humphreys from Glenmore. And they said that they moved into this house in 2004. They loved pine martins, and they noticed some started coming into the garden. So they made a sort of playground in their garden by putting up some ropes and some swings. It paid off. Look at that. You've got frolicking pine martins swinging on a swing in their back garden. Pretty special stuff, eh?
I'm rarely envious, but who wouldn't want that in their garden?
It's very, very special.
Honestly,
yeah.
come on.
Lovely stuff. Keep sending all of your pictures and your films in and your comments. As I always say, we love to hear from you.
Despite the inclement weather, our teams have been out and about running all of those cables, sticking those cameras into our nests. We can take a look at a few of them here now. We're going to catch up on quite a few throughout the course of the programme. But before we go any further, let's take a look at our barn owls. We're feeling a little bit smug. They're snug, we're smug. Because, look, for the first time ever on Spring Watch, they are in colour. We're using a camera which we can rate at 20,000 ISO. That will mean something to photographers. It means that it's extremely sensitive in low light, so there's hardly any light in there, but we can get these colour images of a sleepy barn owl. I promise you more action will occur in colour later in the series.
It's great to see them in colour, though, because after all of these years of doing Spring Watch, I thought barn owls were just black and white, because that's all we've seen them in, isn't it? But anyway, as we always say, we never know what's going to happen to our nests. Nature writes the story, and last night there was quite a dramatic story, I hate to tell you, in our blue tit nest. And if we go to it live now, you can see it's a bit of a sorry sight. It's not been a terribly successful nest so far. Let's see what's happened in the last 24 hours. Yesterday, we left them with 6 chicks. 2 had already perished. The parents were seen feeding them, and our nest watchers kept a very close eye on them. But this morning at 5:45, we see, unfortunately, a third chick is lifeless, so 5 remaining. Then at 7:08, a fourth chick, you can see, is struggling. And just look how wet the adult is as well, coming in from a very rainy morning. And by 8:35, the fourth chick takes its final breath. So, 4 gone, 4 remaining. Literally 3 minutes later, fifth chick is seriously flagging. And that was 8:38. By 9:55, only 3 of the chicks remain. Both parents are in the box, and what they're doing is they're actually working together to remove the little dead chicks' bodies. And they're battling to get the bodies out of the entrance hole to the nest box. They give up in the end, and you can see that there's one dead chick in the corner, and we presume that the others are underneath the remaining chicks, buried in the nest. So very sadly, it's not looking good for our blue tits. There is a little bit of hope. Our nest watchers noticed that just at the end they were bringing in spiders for the chicks, which is a lot more of a substantial meal than those chicks have been having over the last few days. It's such a sad story, isn't it? And unfortunately, our nest watchers went out, saw another nest box very near that one that we've been filming. Same story. Dead chicks in it, some of them just about hanging on. But it's really not looking good for them at the moment.
But is this representative of the whole of the UK? What's going on in those blue tit nests all around the UK? Well, we asked our excellent researcher, Jack Badams, to get in contact with his colleagues at the BTO. They're all bird ringers. They've been monitoring nests. It's a bit of a mixed story. They've come back and said that those blue tits which laid early and were rearing broods earlier managed to get them off. I saw that in my own garden. The last brood left on Saturday, 5 or 6 got out quite safely. Those which are hanging on later, like these, seem to be suffering. Some of them reported to going to nest all over the country today and seeing similar things. So what's happening here? Could it be the amount of food that's being brought in? Well, we've been counting how many times they were bringing food in. Between 7 and 8 yesterday, it was fine, you'll remember, we weren't in all of our rain gear. There were 10 visits. Today, between 7 and 8, there were only 5 visits. Then we trawled through our data archive and we found that in 2017, when we were in Minsbere, on the same day, at the same time, our blue tits visited the nest 44 times. And in 2019, when we were in Sherborne, 51 times. So clearly they were bringing in a lot more food, a lot more quantity. What about the quality? Look at this. Look at what these birds are being fed today in the rain. 13% of the food that we were able to analyse was pupae. Not juicy, fat, green caterpillars, which they like, but pupae, very low in nutrients, high in water. So why aren't they getting those caterpillars? Pretty simple. It's raining and it washes all of the caterpillars off of the oak trees onto the ground. Great news for robins, great news for blackbirds, bad news for blue tits. So it's a shortage of food, and it's a shortage of good quality food that seems to be impacting negatively on their ability to get that brood out of the nest box.
Oh, it's such a shame, isn't it? Because we were so excited to have the blue tits, having not had them for the last 4 years. But as I say, that's the trouble with our nests. They're so unpredictable, aren't they? Anyway, if you think that it's a little bit wet and windy where Chris and I are standing, wait until you see where Yolo is. He's really battling the elements. Yolo, how are you doing?
Yes, well, I'm at Hengistbury Head, a very, very windy Hengistbury Head where we've had 4 seasons in one day. The wind has been relentless. We've had torrential rain, we've had sea mist, but it's lifted enough for me to show you where we are. Behind me, you can see Bournemouth. I'll take you on a little tour. We have Christchurch, just beyond the harbour there, and in the distance over that way, we can't see it at the moment, is the Isle of Wight. But I have to say, it is a beautiful place, and it's a great place to come, especially if you're a bird watcher. They've recorded more than 300 species of birds here, and that includes the ringed plover. They nested on some of the beaches here up till the 1980s, and they died out, as they did over much of southern Britain, because of disturbance from people and people with dogs. But then in 2020, the local council, Christchurch Harbour Ornithological Group and Natural England stepped in and fenced off a section of the beach. And it worked, because in 2023, the birds returned. They laid 3 eggs and reared 2 young. And this year, I'm delighted to say that they've got 4 young. And there's a beautiful end story to this as well, because a row of beach huts over there, the beach is right by there, and they have formed a kind of a ringed plover neighbourhood watch. If anyone disturbs the birds, they're out immediately, so they're ensuring the survival of those chicks. And this is what Springwatch is all about this year, those little things that make a big, big difference. And it is a great mosaic of wildlife habitats, and that includes the harbour behind me. And in late April, our biggest bird of prey was filmed fishing for mullet there. It's a white-tailed eagle. It's a young female. She is known as G818. She was released on the Isle of Wight in 2021. And these birds, these young birds, they're not sexually mature until they're around 5 years old, and they're known to wander far afield. They've been known to go as far as Northumberland and Scotland, but this particular individual, well, she is a real nomad. And in March, she went on a massive road trip. She went right across to Kent, crossed the Channel to France, went on a tour of northern France, back up across the Channel and back to the Isle of Wight. Thanks, incidentally, to Roy Dennis Wildlife Foundation and Forestry England for that satellite data. So in just 22 days, she travelled 2,062 kilometres. That's a phenomenal distance. How were they able to do that? Well, you've only got to look at the size of the bird, the length and breadth of the wings. Overland, any thermal, she'd get high up, she'd move long distances. But it's also partly down to their adaptability, especially when it comes to food. Yes, we know that they eat fish. Of course, some people refer to them as the fish eagle. But a study in Scotland showed that their diet is incredibly varied. I'm now going to show you a pie chart. I would have it here with me, but not in this wind. But have a look at this pie chart. Now, this data has been gathered from 92 nest sites in Scotland. You can see 67% of their diet is birds, 27% mammals, and just 6% is made up of fish. So maybe we shouldn't be calling the white-tailed eagle the fish eagle, maybe we should call it the bird eagle. Right, we're going to leave the wind of Dorset for a little while, dash up to Scotland and catch up with Megan McCubbin on the beautiful Isle of Bute.
Oh yes, Iolo, it has been the most glorious start to my Scottish adventure here down on the Isle of Bute. We really have been spoilt rotten. But today I've made my way from the shores of Loch Fad into the community woodland in the north part of the island. And there is such a variety of different woodland habitats here to explore. We've got native broadleaf woodland, you've got conifers, you've got some plantations, but altogether this variety leads to such a great array of different wildlife species. You've got things like this bit shabby great tit, could be looking better, could be looking as gorgeous as this chaffinch, which is looking far nicer. And we've seen so many willow tits flitting around, we hear them all the time, these small, little, iconic birds that you see a lot around Scotland and bringing colour to the woodland. Beautiful male siskin there with its black cap. Now you're in the woodland, you can hear the birds, you can see the birds, but for a long time there was rumours of another animal that made its home here, but no one really knew. There were no official records of it whatsoever until the 29th of January 2022, just 2 years ago, when John Williams, a local naturalist, decided to come out and explore, and he was treated to the most spectacular encounter. So this is it, John?
This is it. Welcome to my squirrel feeding site.
Thank you for having me here.
No, it's a pleasure to have you. There has been squirrel sightings on the island over the years, so we believe they've been here in small numbers. But what happened was I was walking up to the forestry one day. One of the lorry drivers had a red squirrel run in front of the lorry. So I just decided to come in, like, it's time to kind of have a proper look for these things.
Yeah.
So I came in here and I had a look around, and I remember texting a friend and saying, look, I feel like I'm standing in Squirrelsville. It just felt so nice. It just felt like perfect habitat. I came in the following week and I just saw the squirrel run up.
Saw it?
I saw the squirrel run up the tree above the feeder. So it stopped, it froze, and I froze, and we're kind of standing looking at each other, and I just managed to get the first photo captured of a red squirrel on the island.
The first one ever?
The very first picture, and I've been coming here every week since.
This is number one?
This is number one.
And it's a good photo for the first
I've done okay for the...
Yeah, I would
the
have been so shaky. I'd been like,
I
oh,
was
that's good.
shaking like a leaf. It just froze for long enough that I could get my camera and snap that photograph and proof that they are actually here.
One of those moments you don't forget.
No, that's one that will stay with me, definitely.
Squirrel, hazelnut and a mushroom. I love the little mushroom by its tail as well.
It was just the
That's
perfect setup.
Gorgeous, isn't it? Nice backlit. You can see like how thin their tails actually are with how poofy they look when we just see them with our eye. Well, these photos are wonderful. It's a prime example of what a bit of dedication can do.
Thank you very much, thank you.
Such wonderful images that John has taken, and I've spoken to him quite a bit about his relationship with the squirrels, and the amount of trust that he has with them is just beautiful. They mean the absolute world to him, as of course it would do if you found a population all by yourself, and so much so that he loves them that he has squirrel Sundays where he goes and spends every Sunday just sat watching them. They've mated in front of him, he's seen young squirrels coming out of the dray for the first time, he's been treated to some truly epic encounters, and he's been kind enough to let us tonight to have our long lens wildlife cameraman, Steve Phillips, over there with a live camera. Do we have any squirrels now? It has been raining quite a lot. Nothing there. What have we got? We've got a chaffinch there. Well, that's still quite nice, isn't it? At least it's a good looking chaffinch. But just a few seconds before we were live, we were treated to this red squirrel encounter, which was lovely. It's my first time actually seeing them myself on the island. Looking a little bit worse for wear in the rain, but tempted out enough with a hazelnut. How lovely is that? But the question remains, of course, how did they get to the Isle of Bute? Well, some people think perhaps it was a landowner who historically thought they should be here and therefore brought them over. Other people thought maybe it's because they were able to swim across. Now, red squirrels are able to swim. It doesn't happen very often, but they can do it, and they've been seen swimming about 200 metres off the water, which is pretty amazing. But when you see them here scuttling around, getting all of their food, it's really fascinating to see. You see them swimming, the tail above, trying not to get themselves too wet. But when you see them out and about round here, they have been certainly making use of all the food that John has been putting out. And they go in search of hazelnuts, which they use their incisors to take and scramble and eat. And they cache them all over the floor as well, which is lovely, lovely to see. You can see right here, squirrels taking up. They know exactly where the food is, they know the routine. And look how lovely. Now you see them a lot of the time as an arboreal species in the treetops, but they will come down to the floor using those sharp incisors to open that hazelnut, and they'll take the nut. Sometimes they'll eat it, you can see them manoeuvring with the fingers there, but they spend a lot of their time digging too, patting the floor. And you think that perhaps caching is something that is done randomly, but actually they really select their sites. They know, they have a memory. As of course during winter there's less food, so they're saving them whilst they can. And if you haven't had enough of the red squirrels here, you can go to BBC iPlayer now, where Cumbria Red Squirrel documentary is available for you to watch. I've seen bits of it, it is absolutely fantastic, so I urge you to go and do that. Now, red squirrels, we didn't have them on the live camera, but I bet over at Arn they've got some really good treats for us. Have you guys?
Well, we have, but can I just tell you, I think that I haven't seen enough red squirrels recently. I might go at the weekend, Brownsea Island, just over there, and see the red squirrels.
One of the best places.
Can't get enough of them.
Best places in England to see squirrels. There's no red squirrels, no doubt about that whatsoever. Now, last night, Yola Williams introduced us to one of our mega nests. He showed us exactly where that was. It was on Corfe Castle. It's a Norman castle set on this knoll in Dorset. It's unfortunately blown to pieces in the Civil War, and it's home to a pair of peregrines. Now we know that they had 4 eggs. Here is the female incubating them. She looks a little uncomfortable, tail wedged up against the rock, and the whole time she was incubating, she was fiddling with those twigs. Now I have seen them fiddling with things whilst they're sat on the nest. Essentially, it must be quite boring, mustn't it, sitting there all day just incubating eggs. But she did seem particularly perturbed and wanting to restructure that raven's nest which they've occupied. On one occasion, she even stood up and started kicking at some of the twigs. What a risky proposition when you've got 4 very precious eggs in the nest. Now, typically, of course, when they're active in the nest, incubating, they fold their talons in, and there's little risk that they could puncture these. But look, hanging beneath her here, you could clearly see there one of her eggs. And what we think happened is that it cracked whilst it was in the nest. While she was sat on it diligently for a few hours, the stickiness oozed out and welded that egg to her underside. And here again, look, watch, when she stands up, this is a little later, if you look between her legs, you'll see the feathers being pulled down. They're masking the fact that that egg is hanging there. And she takes off with that still attached. Later in the day, we saw her perched high on the castle, and as she takes off, you can see that that egg has been dislodged. So there were 4, now we're down to 3. What happens next?
That is a bizarre sight, though, isn't it? With it hanging underneath there. But you're right, we're down to 3. What happened next? Well, 3 eggs are in the nest. On the 13th of May, it rained. You could see the rain on that camera box. It rained all day, very, very heavy rain. Both parents were seen on the nest. By evening, the male leaves, the female remains and starts settling down on the nest. And then we get a glimpse of an eggshell. So we presume that one of the chicks has hatched. By the morning of the 14th, 6 a.m, the weather is still pretty bad. But we see another eggshell. So again, we presume the second egg has hatched overnight. We see the female picking up the shell, probably going to ingest that shell to make the most of the calcium. By morning, the weather clears up and the female comes in with food, and we get our first glimpse of a little chick as its head pops up to feed. But what has happened to the second chick? Well, our nest watchers only ever saw one of those chicks. So it looks like 2 eggs hatched, but only one of the 2 survived. So 1 chick alive and 1 egg remaining. Now that egg was the last egg laid. So we were expecting it to hatch 3 days later, and it did. And there we go. We've got a lovely view of 2 of the peregrine chicks. So 2 out of the 4 eggs. What an absolutely lovely thing to see. Well, so what happened next? I'm going to tell you tomorrow. You'll have to wait. What a cliffhanger.
Well, what a side of castle hanger.
That's true.
Let's go from the fastest travelling animal on the planet to something a little less striking, altogether more demure, perhaps our most charming and particular amphibian in the UK.
In the sandy, treeless heaths of southern England, mires form part of the landscape. Over the autumn and winter months, shallow pools have collected in the wetter areas of the heath. So far, they're largely unoccupied, but that's about to change. Tonight, the temperature has risen above 7 degrees Celsius. Just enough to tempt this green-eyed amphibian out of the sandy burrow where it spent the winter. An unmistakable yellow stripe snaking down a wonderfully warty back marks him as a natterjack toad. the loudest amphibian in Europe. And tonight, he's pitch perfect. By recycling the air stored in his vocal pouch, he can sing continuously without even pausing to exhale. The male with the loudest call wins over the female. So he's hoping his solo will hit just the right note. But despite his best efforts, it seems his neighbours are having all the luck. And he, so far, is not. Having lost the battle here, he goes in hunt of another mate on the other side of the pond. Whereas frogs can hop, Natterjack Toad's little legs are more adapted to a fast crawl. His toxic reputation means predators aren't a concern. Enlarged parotoid glands behind each of his eyes contain a potent poison. And he arrives at his new moonlit spot unscathed. His gamble pays off. There's another female here. It's time to go all out to get her attention. His strident song proves irresistible. And he secures his mate. It's a significant success for this vulnerable species. By the next morning, the croaky chorus of the Natterjacks has subsided into silence. Now, where the toads became acquainted, delicate strings of spawn decorate the surface like jewels. Each string is made up of thousands of eggs. Much smaller and more delicate than that of the common toad, laying so many defenceless eggs may act as a survival strategy. Because they're so shallow, these waters stay warm throughout the spring. This speeds up the development of the Natterjack's spawn. And within 10 days, tiny tadpoles are hatching. Now it's a race against time. They must feed quickly and complete their metamorphosis into adult toads before the pond dries up.
Yeah, Natterjack toads are pretty peculiar creatures, and they have such specific habitat requirements that managing the land for them can be quite tricky, and I'll be finding out a lot more about that here tomorrow. And this area is good for Natterjack toads, but it's also a real hotspot for nightjars. Now, they are heathland nesters, and a lot of the heaths here are sites of special scientific interest, but they're quite scattered, as this map shows. And the different colours on the map, well, it just indicate just how urban some of these places are. And the ones in red, well, those are the most urban places. And the Dorset Nightjar Study group? Well, they have been tracking some of these heathland nesting nightjars since the 1980s, and they've discovered some amazing things. They've discovered that the nightjars are hunting in the most un-nightjar-like places. Let's have a look at the tracking data for one male that nests on Upton Heath, right next to Poole. And you can see where the nest is on the heathland. We can also see that the bird is going into Poole. It's hunting along broad-leaved woodlands, along churchyards, along scattered bits of woods, and also in well-lit streetlights. That's just incredible. And why is this? Well, they're looking for moths. Most of what nightjars eat are fairly big moths. And the theory that they have, because nightjars, despite the name, they do need low light in which to hunt. The theory they have, and it's just a theory at this point, is that the nightjars are taking advantage of the light in these urban areas to hunt well into the night. Isn't that fascinating? Fascinating stuff there. And Chris and Michaela, talking of moths, I understand you are going to dispel an urban moth myth.
An urban moth myth, that's not easy to say, is it? But you're absolutely right. Fascinating new data which shows how light affects moths. Now, I'm sure you all turned on a light in the dark and had moths descend on it, and then they just do that thing where they endlessly circle round the light. You particularly see it outdoors when you have a light and hundreds of moths. I mean, just look at that. They're all going round that light source. And the theory has been in the past that they mistake that light for the moon and they use it to help them navigate. But there's new research that thinks that theory probably isn't correct.
Scientists from Imperial College and the University of Florida, I'm going to name them because I think credit where credit's due, Fabian, Sondy, Allen, Theobald and Lynn have used the latest technology using infrared slow motion to look at moths whilst they're circling a bright light source, and also tiny little data loggers that they put onto these moths to study their reaction. And it all comes down to looking at their dorsal light response, the dorsal light response.
And we're going to show what the dorsal light response is by using this wonderful prop. Oh, God, pull it out. There we go. You hold to the prop of this moth.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
This is the dorsal light
Look at
response.
Look at that. This is a buff ermine. It's been beautifully crafted by Lucy. Look at that.
Yeah, but you're going to use it.
Oh, sorry, yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
so just concentrate.
The art
just
is impressive, but yes, okay.
So the dorsal light response is when insects like moths always face their back to the light, and in their natural environment, the lightest part at night would be the sky, the moon, the sky. So they would be facing up to the sky. But
This would
what
mean that
happens?
they can fly along like this without any disturbance because the light is always above them.
But what happens when artificial light source is introduced? Well, it changes their world, of course, because then the brightest thing in their world is the artificial light. So how does that affect their behaviour?
Right, well, I'm just going to stick this arrow in here to indicate the direction that they would hope that the light was coming from so they can maintain their attitude, their flight attitude. So imagine this moth is flying along here, there's no artificial light, it's going to fly because the brightest part, even including UV light, when there's not much light about, would be above it. But what about if it encounters an artificial light source? Well, the scientists saw that it changed their behaviour in three specific ways. The first, if it approaches the light source from the side like this, the moth would begin to orbit or loop around the light source because, as you can see, it's keeping the brightest light on its back like this. And you can see this happening here with a real moth. It's been slowed down. You can correct me if you like, and I may be wrong, but it looks like a large yellow underwing. But just look at it carefully. As it's spiralling around that light source, you can see that it's keeping its back to it. It's the dorsal light response in action. But of course, because it's that singular light source and not the whole sky, this causes the moth to continue to spiral around it. And that's an exhausting process. Okay, what happens if the moth is approaching from underneath and then senses the artificial light source? Well, then what happens is it will go up like this and it will invert. Moths can't fly upside down. You will have witnessed this when you've seen them at those light sources. They turn upside down and then they will plummet down to the ground. Ideally, not a great thing to do if you are a moth. The last thing that might happen is that the moth will approach from underneath, it will fly up into the air, and then it will reach its stalling speed. And then again, it will crash down to the ground. All of these impacts on the moth's behaviour are quite significant. Let's bear in mind that these are the adult stages of these insects. Firstly, they're about emerging and dispersing. Then they're about mating. Then they're about finding somewhere to lay their eggs. In between time, they've got to find something to feed upon. The last thing they need is to be confused by all of those artificial lights. Is it a significant impact? Look at this. Look at this. This is a satellite view of Europe, and look at our light pollution. Personally, I wouldn't want to be a moth unless I was in the middle of Finland, Iceland, or on the northwest coast of Scotland, because whatever happens here, these organisms are going to come into contact with those artificial lights. And as Yolo has already said, we've seen bats and nightjars visiting streetlights to feed on moths. So aside from interrupting their daily business, the business of being a successful moth, they're also increasing the rate of predation. And given that we've had a 78% in our large flying insects, and that's impacting negatively on bats, birds, and just about everything, we ought to be looking after our moths a little more. And you can do that, of course, by doing one simple thing: switching it off.
It's so sad, isn't it? There are so many challenges for our insects, and that's a new challenge that new data has shown. And the only reason they found that out is because of the way they've been monitoring those insects, constantly watching things, constantly learning things. We can all do it, can't we? It's something that Malcolm Ingham has done. He is passionate about badgers in his garden. In fact, in his woodland, he's got 3 sets, put lots of cameras on them, watched them over 10 years. Every day's a school day, always learning something new.
My love of wildlife started basically as a kid. I was fortunate enough to live on the outskirts of a small town. The woods and the fields were my playground. In math lessons, rather than concentrating on what I should be concentrating on, I was reading my Observer's Book of British Animals. That was the catalyst for everything I've done in the future. I worked for over 30 years in conservation, with a large part in rehabilitating and raising badgers. This gave me a real connection to them. And when we retired here to North Wales, I was delighted to find we're surrounded by badger clans. I wanted to find out more about them, so I set up a number of camera traps in the area. It's magic. You could be sat at a badger set for 5 years, and yet you won't achieve the full aspect of that clan's life. Whereas with a trail camera, it misses nothing. We've got 3 main clans. The no-tail clan, because the alpha boar at the time appeared not to have a tail. It was just a very stubby tail. And we've got the Dickens clan. The alpha boar had whiskers, rather like Dickens. They are all great, but when it comes to entertainment, there is one that really delivers. Now we're at the Nutter Clan set. Why the Nutter Clan? Because basically they're a load of nutters. Charging around like idiots. They're just full of the joy of life. When the cubs are old enough to actually start playing, it's infectious. The adults join in, as though they can't resist it. When you actually see it on trail camera, it looks a much bigger area than it actually is. You don't realise it's relatively small. But this is where all the action happens. This tends to be the focal point for socialising and this sort of thing. It's taught me so much more about the life within a clan. It's a constant joy to me, and I have accumulated an awful lot of knowledge about the species, but I'm also adding to that knowledge all the time. Occasionally you do get a chamber or a tunnel will collapse, which creates a vertical hole. And a badger would jump into it and then constantly jump up and down like a jack-in-the-box. To watch it is extremely amusing. Hopefully, my footage can show people what badgers are really like, the softer side of the animal. Badgers are blamed for predating on sheep and lambs. My footage can contradict that theory. On the Nutter Clan set, there's always sheep lying around the set. You've got ewes with lambs, etc. Believe you me, the sheep are the boss. Come April, tiny cubs are making the first emergence above ground. Wobbly legs and what have you, and they're following mum around, and some of the other clan members fuss over them. I'm going to be observing those cubs from first emergence from the set all the way through to being yearlings and beyond. To follow them all the way through to adulthood is amazing. The most exciting thing for me is every single night we have 3 clans of badgers passing through the garden. Badger watching, it's the thrill of anticipation. Dusk is falling and darkness is drawing in. And then you see this black and white face. That white stripe is so distinctive, it may as well be luminous. Then the badger starts to relax. Then a second one appears. The vast majority of wildlife fears human beings, with every reason to do so. But to have an animal that is totally wild, trust you to the degree where they can be around your feet, I'd still get the same thrill now as I did the very first time I ever did it. It'd be a very sad world without them.
What a beautiful film. I totally agree with Malcolm. The entire natural world would be that little bit duller without badgers. That's why it's so important that we protect them. They're such beautiful animals. But I have a bit of a really exciting update for you coming from Malcolm and the Nutter Clan, because it has got a little bit busier since we were there filming a month and a half ago. 3 cubs emerged from the set and have been seen on Malcolm's camera traps playing around. I can only imagine the playground that is happening, that he's getting to observe now that there are even more badgers around. Balancing very precariously on that trunk, but following mum, still of course dependent on her. But what a lovely thing. Those nutter badgers jumping up and down on that trampoline, absolutely lovely. Now, of course, I am here in the woodland, and at the minute, we don't have any red squirrels live for you, unfortunately, but we are trying. But that's not all that I'm here to see. I'm also interested in celebrating the little things, because they're really important too. I'm not talking about the midges, which are currently making home up my nostrils. We're going to ignore those. I'm talking about the big cities that are made on the ground.
Here, the trees and foliage are hiding more than ruins. Strange structures protrude from the ground. These are nests. They are a hive of activity, run by an army of Scottish wood ants.
The workers go out across the environment and their job is to collect food for the colony. And then you've got the soldiers. The soldier ants are able to defend the nest by producing formic acid, which they spray out through their acidophore, a really specialised orifice. And it really works a treat from any oncoming bird or insect that may like to attack the colony. But it's brilliant to see them making the most of the sunshine, doing their anti-business. But what's really cool about this nest in particular is that there's not just one. There is in fact 3 different satellite mounds. And the cool thing about these Scottish wood ants is that they are polygynous, meaning that there could be more than one queen here in each nest. But what we're seeing above the ground here really is just the tip of the iceberg. But to understand how they function, I can't just use my eyes, I've got to use a bit of technology as well. I have here a specialised thermal camera, and if I point it at the wood ant's nest, you can see how hot it is. It is literally shining white, which is the hottest on the spectrum that it can be. You'd never think in a million years that ants would be capable of building something so complicated that it can retain heat. But the question remains, how do they do it? Well, we have very carefully conducted a Scottish wood ant nest for you to feast your eyes upon. It is absolutely huge. It can be 1.5 metres tall, about 2 metres in diameter. It's the biggest it can get above ground. And it essentially acts like a top solar conductor. The sunlight comes down and it warms up the entire area because ants need temperature, a stable temperature, around 28 to 30 degrees Celsius to make sure their metabolic rate is stable, to make sure they're able to grow and develop in the colony. So the question remains though, how do they keep it at the same temperature all the way through? Well, you can see illustrated in red here in the centre, we've got a much warmer part of the nest. And although, as you know, insects don't produce their own heat directly, they can do it indirectly through their metabolic rate. And imagine 100,000 ants scuttling around in a colony, it's going to create some friction and therefore some heat. But the brown area here also illustrates what the nest is made of, the pine needles, the organic matter that they use to construct this amazing piece of engineering. And over time, as that organic matter breaks down, the microbial bacteria respire, also creating heat. So when it gets a little bit too hot, my anti-friend over here, carrying some organic matter in its mouth, in its mandibles, is able to move through these ventilation vents into the cooler area illustrated in blue, and it takes out the organic matter. And if it gets too cold inside the nest, it goes back in, bringing the organic matter back, making sure everyone is insulated and nice and healthy. Now, Scottish wood ants are quite different from other species that live in a similar area in the fact that they are able to better cope with shady conditions within mature woodland. They like mature woodland quite a lot. They prefer sunny spots a little bit. Obviously, a bit of heat gets a little bit more activity, but they are better able to cope in lower temperature conditions. We spoke to Professor Alva Robinson from the University of York, and she thinks that they might be better able to do this because they have a physiological tolerance, meaning they're better able to forage and rear their brood at lower temperature, but also a behavioural response as well, in that they're able to really quickly build a large nest as fast as they possibly can, and therefore, after that, they can keep everybody nice and warm, nice and toasty, nice and happy. I love wood ants. I think they're fantastic little insects. I love getting my nose in to see what they're up to as they're busy moving around all that exciting organic matter. But I know another man who pretty much loves wood ants nearly as much as me. Let's head back over to Arn now, where Chris and Michaela are waiting for us.
Do you love a wood ant?
I do love a wood ant.
I think ants are the perfect example of how little things can make a big difference. But I'm going to give you an anti-fact. Did you know that if you weighed all the ants in the world, they'd weigh the same as all the people in the world?
Did you read that on a lolly wrapper in the 1960s?
Listen, I'd like you to prove me wrong by gathering all the ants in the world and putting them on a weighing machine. No, it's one of those pub facts, you know. It's a great fact, though, isn't it?
Drunken pub fact.
Let's have a look at our live nest. I'm going to take you to what is probably one of my favourite nests, actually. I just love this nest. It's the chiffchaff nest. There they are. Look at them. It's slightly on the side, this nest, all those little faces peeking out. Normally, all of them are peeking out, but they've sort of hunkered down a little bit. Oh, there we go. It's giving me a little nice mouth open. This is what's been happening with them. They remind me of little gangsters sticking their heads out there. They spend a lot of time sleeping, but as soon as they hear the call of the adult, then just watch. There we go, there we go. They come to attention and they take a feed. But look at this. They hear a call, Oh, no, wrong call, that was a robin. Back to, oh, there we go. All the mouths go open. And some food is placed in it. They've been feeding really well, plenty of feeds, and you can see how much these chicks have grown. As I say, that parents are very diligent, and it's not going to be long before they fledge. Parents are putting food in one end, and out comes the other end, a fecal sac. It's taken away. It's a very tidy nest, this. Even the chicks put their little bums out and deposited outside the nest, or, in this case, on top of one of the chicks' heads. Look at that, it's not a good look, is it? A fecal sac right on your head and on your beak. Fortunately, parent comes in, clears it away, and leaves those gorgeous, adorable, fluffy chicks that, as I say, might be leaving us anytime soon. I like them.
Okay, so they are very clean, taking away all of those fecal sacs. Of course, that chiff-chaff's nest is quite close to the ground. What about our siskins? Let's go live to our siskins now. Well, that nest is not quite so clean, is it? Not a lot of activity there at the moment. You can see the youngsters hunkered down. It is a chilly evening here at Arne, but we've been watching them diligently, and we've noted the enormous abundance of feces on the side of the nest there. Doesn't seem to be impeding the development of the youngsters. Their wing bars are already visible there. You can see their flight feathers are through. And then look, this one pops its head up in the middle, and that looks the most advanced of all of them. Its gape flanges, those little yellow bits at the edge of their beak, have almost disappeared. And I think these two are likely to be fledging in the next couple of days. A completely different feeding strategy from the chiff-chaffs that are being fed insects. Here, the siskins are out gathering seeds. They go for much longer, return less frequently, but regurgitate into the mouths of those chicks a real cocktail of nutrients and oils which get those chicks going really quickly. What about the poo on the nest? Well, look, scientists have looked at starlings and they found that that poo contains volatile things that will attract predators and parasites. Clearly, if you're close to the ground, you can't possibly have that. Maybe just because they're higher up in the tree, they don't have to bother so much about it attracting predators. I scoured the literature today trying to find out why. I found little. If you've got any ideas, please let us know.
There's one word for that nest, though. Minging. It's minging. It's absolutely disgusting. Let's check out our blackcaps. Here they are live. We've got, oh, look. We've got the little blackcaps all in the nest there. They've been doing pretty well, too. Let's have a look at how they've been faring. Here they all are. I love the way they pop up when they're being fed. Look, it's just like stretching right up to get the food. That's the black cap of the male black cap, and he's diligently feeding them. They're not so diligent because he picks up a fecal sac. What's he going to do with it? He feeds it to the chick. That's not normal behaviour. He should have flown off with that fecal sac, but he's obviously a little bit confused. Female comes in, you can see the difference. She's got the brown cap. And she's feeding all of them, and she shows the male exactly what you should do when one of them produces the fecal sac, takes it in her beak and flies off with it. You see, it just goes to show these males, they can't multitask. They can't feed and clean at the same time.
I'm not going to take that as a personal insight.
Go on.
However, I think it was because he picked it up and the urge to feed those gaping young mouths there was so great that he didn't know what else to do. All he had in his beak was a fecal sac, so he just put it in there.
I don't know. I think we've been talking too much about poo and fecal sacs
Whilst
now.
I was researching fecal sacs this afternoon, I did find that they do have nutrients which are useful to the females. So in species like this, what we find sometimes is that the female birds will eat those fecal sacs whilst the males will dump them.
OK, well, as I say, enough about fecal sacs and poo. I think it is time to take a breather. And I want you, Chris, to breathe in the colour pink, which signifies the delicate balance between the spiritual world and the material world. And it also represents unconditional love. Breathe in. beautiful. I hope you breathe that in because pink is the heart chakra.
I did.
It's love, it's empathy,
I'm overflowing with
forgiveness.
heart chakra. That's exactly the way I feel at the moment.
You're going to do a downward dog now, aren't you? No, maybe not. OK, let's go and look at our live nests. Let's decide which one we're going to pick out. Should we go to one of your favourites?
Yeah, go on.
The goshawk. I mean, this is a sexy bird. We've had a lot of small birds that we've been featuring in tonight's show, but this is the one that's been really affected by the wind. Just look at it swaying there. Can we see anything in it? If we just peek into the top there, we can see the chick. Look at that. Little chick there. Unfortunately, we haven't got the sexy adult bird, but lovely to see the goshawk.
Okay.
Two of them, you can see just about.
Heidi Williams can lift our spirits with this. She's been filming the fox cubs in her garden. Now, normally litters are 4 or 5, but if you look here, you might be able to spot no less than 11 cubs. So what's going on here? Well, it could be that she's given birth to 11. It's not beyond the bounds of possibility. It would be extraordinarily rare. This is more likely alloparenting. So 2 female foxes, typically related, sisters or one and an aunt, have both given birth to litters, and this one is currently crashing them and looking after them all. Look at that.
OK, I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
Would you prefer to have foxes in your back garden or pine marten? Oh, it's a tricky one, that, isn't it?
Foxes, I'm staying true to my heart.
Really? Pine martens for me.
Sadly, that's all we've got time for today, but coming up tomorrow, guess what we've got? Yeah, more foxes. These are in London in an allotment, and look at that. Oh, so good, so good.
And I'll be taking a deep dive into the diving behaviour of these glorious seals.
And I'm going to be getting close up and personal with the local natterjack toads.
Of course, you can watch our live cameras from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. in the evening, so you can wake up with the watches. But now you can go over to iPlayer for a live watch out. Hannah Stipful, you're going to give us a wave, Hannah? There she is, all ready to do watch outs. Chris, you're going to go on Watch Out tonight, aren't you, and be a guest? Goodness knows what you're going to talk about. We'll be back tomorrow with more nests, more beauty, more amazing science. New science, no doubt, will come up with some of that. So from me, Chris, and the team, we'll see you tomorrow at 8 o'clock. Bye-bye.
Good night.
You can explore some of our amazing and different species and the diverse habitats in which they live by ordering the Open University's free poster. To get your copy, call 0300 303 2465 or go to bbc.co.uk/Springwatch and follow the links to the Open University.